Hello again, and thank you for taking the time to tune in. I'd like to speak once again about my beloved country and the relationship that each one of us has with it and with our Creator. The United States of America is being fundamentally transformed. We are moving to a society that no longer relies on individual liberty and freedom to sustain our culture and our way of life, to one that relies on a powerful, very intrusive central government to meet the needs and the desires of its citizens. This, my fellow Americans, is not what our founding fathers envisioned. On January 20th, 1961, our 35th president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, after taking his oath of office, spoke these words, and I quote, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Now, some 50 plus years later, 47% of Americans are drawing some level of subsidy from the federal treasury. When we reach 51%, we will have crossed a threshold. Now, just so there's no misunderstanding, let me qualify what I just said. Unlike one of our presidential candidates failed to do during the campaign season when he made basically the same statement. Nobody in this country can deny that our veterans who are serving now and who have served in the past rightfully deserve the benefits that they draw from our government. As I've said in the past, they have laid it all on the line to ensure that our republic can endure. And they must be supported in any way that we can support them. Those of us who draw Social Security and Medicaid have earned these benefits. We have paid into them our entire working life. We're not asking for something for nothing. Now, they call these entitlements. I don't call them entitlements. The government of the United States has mismanaged these two programs. And if we continue on the present trajectory that we're on, they will go broke. One, in less than 10 years. One, in about 25 years. Now, these two programs were created to sustain senior citizens in their golden years. Social Security, I believe, became law in 1935 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Medicare became law under Lyndon Johnson. I believe it was 1965. But like I said, we have paid into these two programs. Now, I stated that our government has mismanaged these programs, and they have. But I'll go a step further than that. Our government has stolen from these two programs. Our politicians in Washington, D.C., down through the years, have removed the actual funds that were in these programs and replaced them with a government bond, an IOU, if you will. That's why they are called unfunded mandates. What do they do with the money? Well, they dole that money out to their constituents, both their wealthy, affluent, rich constituents. I'm sure you've heard of corporate welfare. And the poor, slothful, lackadaisical constituents, which can be referred to as social welfare. They did this to ensure that each election cycle they received the votes that allowed them to sustain their grip on power. This thievery by our politicians in Washington, D.C. has been going on for quite some time on both ends of the spectrum by both political parties. Let's take a look at the debt that the United States of America has incurred. It's approximately $16.5 trillion. Let's take a look at where that money is owed. Now, everybody is fond of talking about how we're borrowing from China. Well, the fact of the matter is that only about $1.3 to $1.5 trillion of our debt is owed to China. Another $1.2 to $1.5 trillion is owed to Japan. That accounts for about $3 trillion of our debt. What about the other 16 trillion? Excuse me, what about the other 13 trillion? Who does the United States of America owe that money to? Well, we owe about 8 trillion or so to the Federal Reserve Bank. And I would urge all my viewers to do some investigation into the Federal Reserve Bank. That was established in 1913. And for the last 100 years has been aggressively pilfering the wealth of the United States of America. Do some investigation. Find out what they're all about, who the major shareholders and stockholders are of the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, some of the media have said that we owe this money to ourselves. I'm afraid not, my fellow Americans. Just take a look at what the Federal Reserve Bank is all about. So to China and Japan and to the Federal Reserve, it's about 11 trillion. What about the other 5 trillion? Well, the other 5 trillion is owed to our trust funds. Social Security, Medicare, your various highway and airport trust funds. The government of the United States of America has created the entitlement mentality that exists in this country. An entitlement mentality that says on one end to the very wealthy, to corporate America, you've got to continue to subsidize our endeavors so that we can continue to create the jobs. Actually, what they're saying is you've got to continue to subsidize our endeavors so that our stockholders can be assured that they you to reap benefits. And at the other end of the spectrum, an entitlement mentality that says the wealthy and the prosperous have so much more than what they need. It's only fair that they share it with the rest of us, whether or not we have worked for it, whether or not we have exercised personal responsibility and sound judgment and made good decisions in our life, whether or not we have realized the value of a good education so that we can compete in a free market, free enterprise, capitalist system. Now there's a problem with this mentality. When there is more money leaving the federal treasury than is going into it, as is the case now, we run about a $1.5 trillion deficit every year. We have a $16.5 trillion debt. Sooner or later, we're going to run out of money. Just as former Prime Minister of Maggie Thatcher once said, that's the problem with socialism. Sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. When that happens, America will have only two options: anarchy or some form of dictatorship to keep the peace. Neither one of those options are conducive to liberty and to freedom for American citizens. Nobody's safety, health, security, and protection of their assets and wealth, whether modest, as is with most Americans, or opulent, can be protected from confiscation. We are rapidly moving the same direction that Western Europe is in right now. Unsustainable debt, no job growth, huge inflation, cradle to grave entitlements. And one only has to look at the news and see the effect that it is having on countries like Greece and Spain and France and Portugal and Italy and so many of the other Western European countries. My fellow Americans, this is not what our founding fathers envisioned. Now, after the last presidential election, I took the liberty to research. And this is what I found. And please keep in mind that My numbers aren't 100% accurate, but they're pretty close, and I would urge you to investigate it for yourself. The population of the United States of America is approximately 314 million. Of those 314 million people, 208, 209 million are 18 years old and above, which means if they are registered and follow the proper guidelines and procedures, which I have to admit are somewhat dubious right now, they're eligible to vote. So let's do some simple arithmetic. If you subtract the total vote that Mitt Romney and Barack Obama received, which are about 113, 114 million votes, from the 208, 209 million people in America who are 18 years old and above, you get a number of 95 million people. That's right, my fellow Americans. 95 million people in America who are eligible to vote chose, for one reason or another, not to vote. Now, common sense tells me, had these people voted, the results of the election would have been dramatically different. Fact is, if only 10% of those people voted, the results would have been different. And so my question, the people out there who chose for one reason or another not to vote, is this: what kind of a country do you want for yourselves, for your children, and for your grandchildren? Because as of now, you have absolutely no say-so over the direction we are headed in. Are you happy with that? Can you live with the fact that there are bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. that are making decisions that affect your way of life, your future, your children's future, and your grandchildren's future, and you have absolutely nothing to say about it? My fellow Americans, I would urge you to reject the complacency, the apathy, and yes, in many cases, the ignorance that you might harbor in your life, and begin to take part in the political process. A process, I might add, that is only a dream in many parts of the world. Because if we continue on the same road that we are on right now, in 5, 8, 10 years, you're not going to recognize the United States of America. It is not going to be the beacon of hope for our citizens and for those in the rest of the world who aspire to one day pursue growth and prosperity. Please, get involved with our political process. Once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to what I had to say, and as I've said in the past, If this message has been a blessing to you and you do agree with it, pass it on to your friends, pass it on to your family. And of course, if you disagreed with it, well, that is certainly your right, because this is the United States of America. But I would suggest that you're part of the problem and not a part of the solution to stabilizing our culture and protecting our liberties and freedoms. Thanks again. May God bless you, and may He continue to bless these United States. Thank you.